Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another brief impromptu video by 1960s and 70s Chronicles of a Golden Era. This one is going to be another video with the intention of promoting the Chronicles YouTube channel as the way forward for Chronicles as a means of getting the message that we're trying to get across to as many people from as many generations as possible, because YouTube will do that in a way that Facebook doesn't anymore. Now, the message we're trying to get across is that our era, the golden era as we call it, the 1960s and 70s, was very important, very significant in modern history, and really shaped the fairness, the justice, the equality that exists in society today, which is a work in progress still, granted, but it was set in motion by the generations of the 1960s and 70s, and we used our culture to do that, particularly our music. Now, why was this? There was a reason for it. The generations that were young in the 1960s and 70s were born into a world where their parents, pretty much all of them, had lost their parents, lost brothers, mostly brothers, perhaps sisters as well, and society was devastated by the Second World War that they had grown up around, and perhaps some of them taking part in. And by the time we reached the 1960s, our generations had heard all these stories of devastation and war, world war, from our parents and our grandparents. And now we were expected to inherit that situation, the acceptance of war and conflict, just as they had before them, only in increasingly devastating ways. The First World War, even more devastating, the Second World War. And they were passing on the stories, the horrors of these things to us. But we were a generation being expected to grow up and live with and accept a situation where war was going to be inevitable, but this time, a much more devastating prospect. This was nuclear war, and living with the daily threat of utter annihilation if something wasn't done about it. Now, this was something that our generations, inspired by, it must be said, in fairness, the stories and the laments and the loss of our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, we were inspired by this to say, well, somebody has got to say no, somebody has got to say that this isn't acceptable anymore. Some generation, and that was us. Now, we had some advantages, things that were coming our way that we were able to use. For a start, mass media, satellite communication, broad access to television, and so on. Also, teenage culture, which, it has to be admitted, was originally devised as a corporate enterprise, just another way to sell things, another market to sell things to, the teenage market. But it wasn't anticipated that this teenage market of the, first of all, the late 50s, moving into the 60s and 70s, this teenage market was going to be buying records and buying merchandise and exploring culture that was not just entertainment and not just buying and selling products. This was an education. We were buying records that were saying things that had a commentary to make, a social commentary, things that were educational, things that were informing us about the world and how we should react to the iniquities in it. This was not anticipated by the establishment, who were just out to sell products to a new market, the teen market. As a result of that, combined with mass media broadcasting and satellite and so on, our culture got across the world. And things like the blues, the folk protests of earlier ages, particularly, of course, Woody Guthrie, who inspired, for example, Bob Dylan, Donovan, Mark Bowen, these kind of folk protests suddenly became mass media, mass market. People were writing their own songs inspired by the likes of those folk singers and blues singers who had things to say about society. Now, as a result of that, we not only challenged the concept of war and the acceptability of it, we started to also challenge sexism, racism, social inequality, homophobia, all of the social inequities that existed in society and had existed in society right up until the 1960s generations. Now there was mass media. Now there was a mass market for youth culture, which was more than just entertainment, and it was getting across to society in the mainstream and making a difference. And consequently, as a result, a fairer society in terms of all those inequities of the past, racism, sexism, social inequality, homophobia, and so on, were addressed and changes set in motion, still a work in progress. But it was because of the youth, social, and cultural revolution of the 1960s and 70s, expressed mainly through culture, which got across the mass media and got into the mainstream. It's because of that social and cultural revolution that these changes were set in motion, and whatever level of fairness and justice and equality we have now is because of that. Now, Chronicles exists to get that message across and to say to younger generations, please don't blame us, we were not perfect, but we set changes that you want to see in motion, and we had greater reason for doing it. We were under threat of extinction, and we had been inspired by the horror stories from our parents and grandparents, and we tried to do something about it to make sure that younger generations and future generations from this point on don't have to go through the same horrors, and we did so through culture. So we'd like to say, please join us, all generations, and please remember the golden era, the 1960s and 70s, for what it was, the classical era of modern culture, and the era that set in motion the fairness, the justice, and the equality that we have today, and hopefully will see improvements on in the future. But please remember our generation with gratitude as the ones who stood up and said no and demanded peacefully and through culture that society must change. And we made that change at least begin to happen. With that, I'm going to say please subscribe to this YouTube channel. It's free to do. Leave comments, share the video, and get the message out to as many people as you can that people make a difference. Societies make a difference. Younger generations make a difference. Ours was a new generation, whole generation with a new explanation, to use the words of the Scott McKenzie song San Francisco, 1967, The Summer of Love. We started it. We gave you the equipment to carry it on, you, the younger generation of today. All we ask is a nod of thanks for that. And please subscribe to the video. Please like, please share. Please leave comments. You're welcome to do that. Please do that. Take care. I'll see you next time.